Hey friends out there in YouTube land or however else you came across this video today. I'm Robert Hamm with Robert Hamm Photography, and I'd like to talk with you about really improving your photography. And I've got one common mantra for you. Shoot film. Very simple. Today we get so busy and we get so wrapped up with shooting multiple images. A lot of what we do gets mixed into the mediocrity of everything else that's going on. Photos online like Instagram maybe have a chance to be seen for a second, maybe 2 seconds before they're pushed from one spot to another. Like Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, like there's millions of photos being uploaded each day. Most of them are actually from a cell phone. What this creates is a place where a customer, someone who may wish to appreciate some form of art, specifically if we're talking about fine art, definitely fine art, but more if we're talking about photography is like wedding photography or portrait photography. You see, these are two specific staples of business that had a relatively large barrier to entry just a few years ago. And today, because of the prevalence of digital cameras and adequate cameras on cell phones, people think that photography is just something as easy as point and shoot. And unfortunately, it's not that easy. There are a lot of very specific programs and algorithms that make phones take great photos and make cameras take great photos. But the creativity of the art form comes in when the artist, the photographer, chooses the composition, the subject, its separation from the background, and what to include in an image, like composure. In my field specifically, when it comes to wedding photography, I hear more and more often that clients, prospective clients, may prefer to have a friend or a neighbor or someone like an uncle do their wedding photography. Now, this mostly happens in people that have smaller budgets, and they make these concessions because they think that a qualified and competent wedding photographer would be outside of whatever budget that they have. And I would say that that's not true. There are photographers that fit every budget. The biggest thing you have to worry about when you are looking for a photographer fitting a budget, and this is both on the side of the client as well as the side of the photographer, is that you don't find a photographer that is not truly competent in their job. Remember, as a wedding photographer, that photographer is your historian. They're going to document your wedding, and it's only going to be done once. So you could hire a photographer and get someone that's not competent that was just going to spray and pray. I met a couple of photographers the other day at a little convention where they told me that there's two of them, between the two in an 8-hour day, they take about 8,000 photos. That makes no sense. And deliver around 1,200 to 1,500 photos to their clients. That makes no sense, okay? There are times when a quick shutter speed and the ability to take 10 photos in a second is important, such as a bouquet toss, such as the first kiss, right? Such as maybe some really fast-moving stuff. But for the most part, wedding photography has elements of candid, has elements of photojournalistic, and it has elements of traditional portraiture, which is post-portraiture. So most of the photography that you're going to do is going to be in a well-thought-out, well-planned-out environment. And only during the times where things are going to be fast-moving, like the bouquet or the kiss, would we want to use some kind of like continuous auto, like 10 frames a second. What ends up happening is, for the client, it's not good because when you get 1,500 photos, you're never going to look at that. You may think you will. It sounds great, but you're not going to look at all 1,500 photos. And the photographer has not curated that album for you. So they're not the 1,500 best photos. They're just the 1,500 average photos. That's what it is. And you want your photographer to curate your album. Remember, they're a historian. When you work with a photographer, you're working with someone who is going to write your story. Your cake decorator, your cake, your food, your DJ, the venue, those are all just elements of your story. None of those elements tell your story. Your photographer tells your story. That's very important. So the other thing is, when you're looking at photographers and you recognize that someone takes a lot of photos, if you hear like how many photos do you deliver, and if you hear 5, 6, 7, 800 photos, you need to pull back a second and ask them, hey, how do you shoot? When you're looking at complete albums, look for things like focus, composition. Look for those photos to make sure that they're not off axis. That's bad. You don't want a Dutch tilt. which is what it's called when you have a diagonal on your center line, unless that Dutch tilt is creating drama. And then it's a gimmick when you say everything's a Dutch tilt. It's just like black and white. It's a gimmick if everything's black and white. The reality is that black and white is usually used by photographers to fix color errors and still have a deliverable image. And that's wrong. That's just absolutely wrong. If you're going to shoot in black and white, you really need to compose for black and white. Your photographer should compose for black and white photography, which means looking at the subject completely different, and generally means looking at the subject black and white through your viewfinder, even if you're shooting raw. Now, these things are kind of technical, and the only way that you'll ever get to know them is to stop just looking at the images. As a client, an educated statement or an assessment would be to ask how someone shoots, and more specifically, do you shoot manual? Do you shoot automatic? And if they say they shoot manual, then check their work. Ask to see the file. On the file, that information in there will very easily tell you whether or not they're shooting manual. And this is really the only way that I can give you as a customer any advice to help choosing a good photographer, because most people will go out and think they're a photographer the minute they buy a camera. They spend $800, $1,000, $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 buying a system at Best Buy, and then they've got this badge of honor because they've got this big crazy camera. They're going to run around and think that they do something awesome. And all they're going to do is put it in automatic mode. Well, there is no automatic mode specifically on this camera. You know what? There's some positions like A, like for aperture priority automatic or shutter speed priority automatic. There's a program mode, right? But this camera, that was a Fuji, is very much like this camera right here. This one was built in 1983. This is a Minolta X570. Okay, and you'll see an automatic position because it's got shutter priority automatic, but it's a manual camera. The only reason you'd want to use shutter priority automatic is if you wanted to have a specific amount of motion shown in the image, and you wanted to capture that, and then you would allow the camera to make a decision about the actual aperture. And the reason that that's important is because sometimes a professional will need the assistance of an automatic mode in order to help capture the image. And that makes sense. Think about a dynamically changing environment. Think about one where you're at a sunset and light is continuing to change while you're taking the portraits. If you want silhouettes, then you're going to need to make sure that your shutter speed is on a specific shutter speed so that you can black out everything except the sunset and the silhouette. If you didn't and you allowed the camera to choose those things, that image would continue to try to expose the subject, and you would have these weird looking images. Well, you see, that's something that a professional photographer would know, and they would be able to make that choice because that's what they're trained to do. But your uncle or the guy that shoots 10,000 images at a wedding or 8,000 images at a wedding, they don't have that understanding. My final and most important piece of advice for a photographer here is to shoot film. The barrier to entry in photography wasn't ever the camera, it wasn't ever the lens, it was the monetary cost, the price you paid for photographing and making mistakes. Film costs money, processing costs money, and you only get 24 to 36 shots at it at a time, and you don't get to know what you're shooting. You don't get to see the image. So what film photography does, without an LCD, what film photography does is it teaches you to read light. It teaches you to look at the exposure and understand what you're seeing in a way that's going to make sense on the camera. It's real simple. If you can do it in film, you can do it in digital. And this camera right here is a very important camera for that. This is the Fuji X100S. If you don't want to buy a film camera, and if you don't want to wait for film processing and you still want to shoot, but you want to be able to slow down, what you're going to need is a camera that acts like a film camera. And the Fujis will do that. Get the X Pro 1, get the X100, and turn off everything except for the optical viewfinder right here. What will happen is you can turn this LCD screen off so you see nothing. You can turn off the electronic viewfinder inside of here so you see nothing. So all you see is the lens through the viewfinder, and that's it. Which means you won't be able to cheat. Which means you'll have to think about what shutter speed means and what aperture means. And oh, by the way, don't change your ISO either. Set it on 200 or 400 and then go out for the day and take 12 or 24 or 36 shots and then compare. The reason that's important is because back in the day with film, you had one film speed and you had to make it work. That taught you to understand the relationship between shutter speed and ISO and film speed. But today, with digital cameras, you can change all of those as you wish. You can even use an automatic ISO mode, and that will then change your shutter speed or your aperture based on your auto ISO. Or if you don't have these set down, if you want to, you can set the shutter speed and your aperture, and then it will automatically change the ISO to make sure the exposure is correct. Well, that's no good because that doesn't help you learn. And honestly, that's what we need a lot more of. Hey, for the industry, people don't understand how to appreciate our work because there are a lot of people producing extremely mediocre work and trying to pass that off as professional work. So really, you're like the crowd drowning out the chorus. You know, you're the many drowning out the few. And I don't want you to stop. Photography is a dying art. I want you to continue. I want you to learn. And I want you to become better. So this video right here is for you. It's for you specifically. Go out there, shoot film, and get better. Guys, I'm Robert Hamm, roberthamphotography.com. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, if you stuck around this long, hit me up with a like, subscribe, and a comment. And as always, keep shooting, my friends.